My name is Emma. I currently work hard in a company that I co-founded with my friend, and I live with my husband, John, in an apartment. But when my mother-in-law found out, she had some words to say to us. I think it's okay to live in an apartment if you're living alone, but if you're married, I'd like you to live in a proper place like a condominium or a house. She seemed to imply that living in an apartment isn't a proper lifestyle. My mother-in-law has lived in a house built by her parents since she was born, and the house she currently lives in is the one she's lived in since she was a child. Maybe she thinks it doesn't take much effort to live in a house. Currently, the only things my in-laws have to pay for are property taxes and renovation fees. The rest is just utilities and various other living expenses. But we don't have much money to spend on those living expenses. Our financial situation is tighter than we thought, and we can't afford to move to a place that costs more than our current apartment. Even if you say just move, there are many expenses like moving company fees, cleaning fees, and down payments for the new place. Because we can't spend money on extra things, John and I have lived in an apartment the entire year since we got married. But my mother-in-law, concerned about this, made comments like the above during New Year's when other relatives were around. Among the relatives, there were those who also lived in apartments, and they clearly looked displeased. One of the female relatives responded with a disapproving tone, "Excuse me," to that woman. She said, "No, I'm not saying apartments are bad, but it's embarrassing for me as a mother to see a decent child like John continue living in an apartment." My mother-in-law, who kept glancing at me, seemed to want to say that it's my fault Johnny's living in an apartment. My mother-in-law made those remarks in the kitchen where the men were already having a drink, and only a few female relatives, myself, and my mother-in-law were present. It seemed like John didn't think that there was any animosity between my mother-in-law and me. We've been married for a year, and I've been so busy that I hardly had any chance to chat with my mother-in-law. I hadn't been sure whether we were on good terms or bad terms. However, from what she said, I instantly realized that she had no intention of getting along with me. The decision to live in an apartment was John's, so if you have any complaints, can you please address them to him? I firmly stated, and then took the pot of rice I had just finished serving to the dining area. For a moment, she looked surprised, but then she frowned. Later on, when I returned to the kitchen, my mother-in-law glared at me, but perhaps she was cautioned by another female relative, as she didn't make further remarks to me. On the other hand, the other female relatives defended me by saying things like living in an apartment is perfectly normal. Everything is expensive nowadays, and buying a standalone house is not easy. Under different circumstances, John and I might have considered buying a house, but in our current situation, it's far from possible. When no other female relatives were around, my mother-in-law would start making sarcastic comments to me. "John is earning well, so the reason you can't afford a house is probably because someone is wasting money," she would say loud enough for me to hear. I decided to ignore her, thinking of it as her just mumbling to herself. No matter how you look at it, there's nothing wrong with living in an apartment, and we are not the reason for our current situation. I shouldn't be blamed for our choice to live in an apartment by my mother-in-law. So after the New Year gathering, I told Yoshi about what his mother had said. "Your mother told me she doesn't want us to live in an apartment forever. She said living in an apartment isn't considered a proper lifestyle," I said, to which John's eyes widened in surprise. "What? What kind of life does she expect us to lead then? It seems like she wants us to move to a condominium or live in a standalone house." John shrugged and said, "With our earnings, affording a condo or a house is like a distant dream. I wish my mom would stop daydreaming. She still thinks I'm some kind of genius. It seems that when John was younger, he was very smart and was always pampered and praised as a genius by his mother. When I was in elementary school, it seems that my mother-in-law used to brag about John to the neighbors, prompting them to compliment how smart and impressive he was. Perhaps my mother-in-law still clings to that feeling to this day. She had grown accustomed to having her son praised by others, and continues to believe that she deserves such admiration. However, when one reaches middle school and high school, effort begins to play a pivotal role. John, having been spoiled, lacked the effort in his studies compared to his classmates, resulting in a decline in his test scores. As a consequence, even after graduating high school, he couldn't get into the university he aspired to and settled for his backup choice. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law still seems to believe that her son is a genius and that he continues to lead a superior life than others. What struck me, however, was that John never corrected her misconception. It's one thing if you were still a child in middle or high school and felt unable to refute a parent's praise, but now John is an adult. Isn't he uncomfortable with being continuously labeled a genius when he earns below the average salary for his age? "Hey, John, why don't you explain to your mother why we don't have money for a house?" "Huh? Why should I?" "Because your mother said it to me. She thinks we don't have money for a house because someone is spending recklessly. She assumes you're earning money, and I'm spending all of it." "Really? Maybe you're just overthinking and overinterpreting what my mom said." John sighed. That single gesture made it clear that he was reluctant to confront his mother about the truth. Even so, considering that his mother was making snide remarks about his wife, one would think he could at least caution her. But John didn't budge. There were other underlying issues, but from then on, I started harboring some resentment towards John. To make matters worse, my mother-in-law began to frequently visit our apartment. We had rarely seen each other before due to our busy schedules. However, after a tiring day at work, I would return to our apartment only to find my mother-in-law and John there, with John eagerly eating the dinner she had prepared. And then the mother-in-law said to me as I came home tired, "Oh, you're just coming home now? Dinner time has already passed. Keeping your husband waiting while you're out having fun, you're failing as a wife. You'll be skipping dinner tonight," she said arrogantly. I thought to myself, who is she to be so presumptuous when she's not even my own family? Despite her haughty remarks, she has never once contributed financially to our lives. Today, other than cooking for her son, she hasn't done a single thing for our family. Why should I, tired from work, have to be told by such a person that I'm to go without dinner? Enough is enough. What are you doing here? Going through someone else's fridge and using up their food without permission. I was in charge of cooking in her household. I had planned out the meals for the entire week in advance, making them cost-effective. Yet most of the week's ingredients that were in the fridge have already been used up, even though we're just halfway through the week. The mother-in-law probably has no idea how hard I've been trying to save money. All the ingredients for the week were there, and now they're all used up, and you've even thrown away parts that could have been used. What were you thinking? Despite her saying I should skip dinner, the dinner table was filled with more food than her son could probably eat. Yet, without showing any remorse, she laughed and said, "Oh, you mean I threw away the usable parts like the leafy parts? You were going to make my son eat that. Those parts are also valuable ingredients." As I confronted the mother-in-law, her son, who had been eating her food, said in a carefree manner, "Come on, she didn't mean any harm. Just let it go." Who does he think is the reason I've been trying so hard to save? I was dumbfounded. Unintentionally, I blurted out what, perhaps realizing his words were thoughtless. He shrank back a bit. Seeing this, the mother-in-law said, "Excuse me, Emma. What's with that attitude towards your husband? I can't stand it any more. You're not fit to be his wife. You probably waste all of his earnings by going out and having fun every day, don't you?" She said this based on her own assumptions. "I go to work, not out to play," I retorted. However, before I could retort, My mother-in-law spoke up. "You freeloading ET, get out. Divorce, divorce." Mother-in-law's outburst made me frown, but as I glanced back and forth between her and my husband, realizing the extent of his apathy towards our relationship, I felt all my love for him evaporate. Whether he was afraid of being abandoned by mother-in-law or for some other reason, he would always ignore me whenever mother-in-law blamed me for everything. I had done so much for our life together, yet he would never defend me from her, let alone admit his own faults. The reason our life is so financially challenging is not just due to his meager earnings, but also because I've been paying off his debts to the tune of $1,300 every month. After allocating that $1,300 for his debt, the remaining money is barely enough for rent and living expenses, making it hard to save. That's why I had been trying so hard to save up. Although he earns a bit, he considers the $1,300 as borrowed from me and plans to pay me back gradually. But at this rate, he'll never be able to pay me back. I doubt he'll ever finish paying me back, even when we're old. I wondered if there was any point in continuing this marriage, having to save and pay off his debts, especially when constantly berated by mother-in-law. Then it struck me. Maybe I should just leave him to his mother. Having made up my mind, I nodded. "All right." "Oh, how wonderful, John. Now you won't have to deal with that troublesome wife anymore." Mother-in-law joyfully clasped her hands together, while John looked bewildered, and for good reason. All this time, I had been the one paying off the debts he incurred. If I were to accept the divorce, he would lose the person paying for him. However, ignoring John's gaze, I began to pack my things. "I'll come to pick up the rest of my stuff later. If anything's missing, I'll sue," I declared as I left the house. Immediately after, I received a message from John online saying, "What should I do about repaying the debt?" I couldn't help but laugh. Rather than worrying about his wife, who was kicked out after being told to get a divorce, he seemed more concerned about his debt. He really was a hopeless man. I might need to be grateful to my mother-in-law for pushing me to get divorced before he drained all my money, I thought. But I worried that if things stayed this way, John might not want to let go of me, who was repaying his debt. So I replied, "You know, if your mother was so insistent on us getting a divorce, she must believe she can support you even if I'm gone." "Wait, by support, you mean she's going to repay my debt?" John asked. "Maybe. I don't know much about your mother, but if she's calling me a freeloader, she must have money, right?" "Then I'll ask her to pay you back for me too," I said. I was relieved that he didn't forget about repaying me. If he had, I would have had to involve a lawyer and negotiate. In reality, with so much debt to pay, the savings we accumulated during our marriage weren't much. I really needed him to pay me back as soon as possible. The longer he waited, the less likely he would want to pay. If that's the case, how about she pays me in one lump sum? If your mother finds out you're still connected to your ex-wife, it might become problematic, right? I suggested. "You're right. I'll talk to her." John readily agreed to my proposal. Thanks to that, he didn't cling to me and handed over the already filled-out divorce papers when I came to collect my things from the house. My mother-in-law watched me gather my belongings with a smug look on her face. When I finally said to my mother-in-law, "From now on, everything's on you." "Good luck," she laughed and replied. "From now on, John will be supporting me." What is there for me to worry about? She probably hadn't discussed money yet. I quickly left the apartment before my mother-in-law found out the truth. After staying at my parents' house for a while and finding a new place, I moved in. Just as I was enjoying my new life living alone, I got a call from my mother-in-law. I was so busy that I forgot to block her number. When I answered the phone, my mother-in-law sounded panicked. I never heard of this. What? A monthly repayment of $1,300, she exclaimed. Oh, didn't John inform you? John had debts, and until now, I've been repaying $1,300 every month. But since we're divorced, it's now your responsibility to pay that amount, I explained. I never agreed to pay anything. Since you pushed me out, both John and I assumed you'd be prepared to pay in my place, I added. How much debt is there in total? My mother-in-law asked. Around $10,000 left. It was originally over $30,000, I replied. $30,000? I can't pay that back, my mother-in-law exclaimed. Since she's a homemaker, she probably can't afford it. Perhaps you'll have to rely on her husband. I'm not sure who John will turn to for the money, but as long as I get repaid, I don't care whose money it is, I said. By the way, I had made John promise before we got married that he'd repay any money I used for the debt. So he owes me that amount too, I added. What? So you're saying he needs to come up with more than the original $30,000? That's impossible, my mother-in-law protested. I don't know about that. Please pay promptly. I can consult with a lawyer if necessary, I said firmly. When I took a firm stance, I could hear my mother-in-law crying on the other end of the line. I thought that with John earning well and with me, Emma, the spender, gone, I'd be able to use a lot of John's money. This wasn't what I expected. It seems my mother-in-law planned to spend lavishly, thinking she'd benefit from her son's high income after getting rid of me. Looks like her plan backfired. Compared to John, I earn more, and John's salary is below average for his age, so his mother doesn't have the money to splurge. In fact, it might be more likely that she'll have to support John in the future. Since I've already divorced, please handle your family matters on your own. Goodbye, I said before ending the call and immediately blocking her number. Since I wasn't sure if John and his mother would tell the truth, I took the initiative to inform his father about what had transpired. Apparently, he wasn't even aware that John and I had divorced. He did know about the debt John had racked up from gambling, and was also aware that I had been repaying $1,300 monthly. He repeatedly apologized to me over the phone. His father immediately called in John and his mother and reprimanded them, saying, "What have you done?" Subsequently, he covered all the repayments to me. As for the remaining debt from gambling, he declared that under his supervision, John and his mother would work from morning till night, allocating their entire monthly salary for repayments. Consequently, John seems to have moved out of the apartment we shared and returned to his parents' home. In the neighborhood, he's now infamous as the foolish husband who, despite having me cover his debts, conspired with his mother to push me out. I heard he's been having a tough time recently. I received a call from an unknown number. The voice pleaded, It's me, Emma. Please get back together with me." To which I responded, "I'm not falling for a scam," and hung up. I promptly informed his father about this, and it seems John was no longer allowed to use his phone, except for work-related calls. As for me, now free from the stifling life with John, I'm diligently working at my company. For the time being, I've decided to say that my job is my only love, refraining from romantic pursuits.